The cafeteria at Fort Ridgeview buzzed with the usual midday chatter, the smell of hot food filling the air as soldiers in their fatigues navigated the long rows of tables. At the far end of the room, Emily Carter stood in line, her tray of food balanced carefully in her hands. She was just another face in the crowd, or so it seemed. A quiet combat medic with a reserved demeanor. She rarely drew attention to herself. As she made her way to an empty seat, Colonel Rick Warren, his polished boots gleaming, emerged from the shadows of the doorway. He was a towering figure, both in stature and rank, and he seemed to radiate authority the way some men radiated arrogance. Without warning, his voice cut through the noise like a blade, harsh and mocking. "On your knees already," he sneered, his cold eyes locking onto Emily as she set her tray down. He stepped forward and, with one swift movement, slammed his boot into her food tray, sending mashed potatoes, meatloaf, and a half-filled glass of water splattering across the floor. The cafeteria fell silent for a split second, but then, like a switch being flipped, laughter erupted from the surrounding tables. Phones slid from pockets and bags, the bright screens reflecting the growing ridicule. Colonel Warren stood over her, his sneer widening as the crowd watched. "Pathetic," he muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. "This is what happens when princesses play soldier." Emily didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Her hands, steady and precise, began to gather the scattered utensils, one by one. Her movements deliberate. There was no trace of anger or humiliation on her face. The only sound in the room was the clinking of metal against the tray as she cleaned up the mess with the same quiet composure she brought to every task, every day. The laughter continued, but it was distant now, fading into a blur as she focused on her routine. She didn't need to respond. She didn't need to justify herself. She just needed to keep going. From the back of the room, a shadowy figure watched the scene unfold. There was something about Emily, something that didn't fit with the easy judgment of the crowd. The figure's eyes narrowed as they locked on the dog tags hanging from Emily's neck. There, almost hidden beneath her collar, the numbers 847 gleamed in the harsh cafeteria light. A small flicker of recognition passed through the stranger's eyes. The figure quickly turned and walked out, pulling out their phone with a newfound sense of urgency. The incident would not go unnoticed. Not this time. Emily finished cleaning the last of the mess and then calmly walked to the door, ignoring the stares of the soldiers who had witnessed the spectacle. She moved like a shadow, blending into the walls of the building as she passed by, untouched by the mockery. Her life, after all, had been full of far worse. She didn't need to fight for their respect. She didn't need anyone to understand. She just needed to carry on. As Emily stepped outside into the cold, her breath fogging in the air, she reached up and touched the dog tags hanging from her neck. The metal felt cool against her fingertips. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes, letting the weight of them ground her. The numbers reminding her of a time when she had been more than just a medic, when she had been someone's lifeline, someone's savior. But none of that mattered here. Not now. Not to them. She was just Emily Carter, the quiet girl in uniform. The cafeteria doors swung open behind her, and for a moment, the echoes of laughter and ridicule seemed to follow her. But she kept walking. Her footsteps were steady, measured. Her mind, as always, focused on the mission ahead. Nothing else mattered. Nothing ever would. The shadowy figure that had watched her earlier made one last glance back, their eyes lingering on her retreating figure. There was more to this woman than met the eye, and soon, everyone would know. The sterile white walls of the medical facility at Fort Ridgeview were always the same, clean, efficient, but lacking warmth. Emily Carter moved through the halls like a ghost, her presence barely noticed by most. Her colleagues knew her only as the quiet medic who worked the night shifts, handling difficult cases no one else wanted. The younger medics, eager to prove themselves, avoided her, unsure of how to interact with someone so distant. Her role was simple: patch up soldiers, keep things running, and stay out of the spotlight. But Emily had never been one for attention. She preferred it that way. In the quiet moments between patients, Emily would find herself reaching up to touch the dog tags that hung beneath her uniform. The metal was cold against her fingertips, a reminder of a life she no longer spoke about. 847. The number had been etched into the tags long ago, a simple sequence that carried with it more weight than most would ever understand. It had become a reflex, a habit she didn't even notice anymore. Her fingers would trace the numbers absent-mindedly, a ritual that grounded her, even as the world around her carried on without ever truly seeing her. The medical center was bustling, as it always was, with soldiers coming in for everything from routine checkups to more serious injuries. Yet, Emily worked in the background, unnoticed, her hands steady as she set up IVs, administered injections, and stitched wounds with practiced precision. She was good at what she did. No one could deny that. But the soldiers she cared for, and the other medics she worked with, saw only the surface. The quiet woman who never spoke much. The one who didn't complain when handed the worst shifts. The one who never seemed to break under pressure. They didn't know about the horrors she had seen, or the skills she had gained in places most would never dream of visiting. She had seen war. She had seen death up close. And she had saved lives under impossible circumstances. But none of that mattered now. Here, she was just another medic, one of many. There was no recognition, no praise, and no understanding of the ghosts that followed her. She had learned to live with the silence, the isolation, and the loneliness. It was easier this way, better to stay in the background, where no one could ask questions. Emily's routine was almost clockwork. After every shift, she would return to her apartment modest, almost bare, except for the essentials. It wasn't much, but it was enough for her. Her 1998 Honda Civic sat in the parking lot, the rust creeping slowly along the edges of the wheel wells, a testament to its age. The odometer read 237,000 miles, but it still ran, just like Emily. It was old, but reliable. She didn't need anything more than that. The apartment was the same functional, sparsely furnished, with a photo of her team from the 847th Forward Medical Response Team on the nightstand. There were no mirrors in her bedroom. She couldn't bear to look at her reflection first thing in the morning. Not after everything. Each morning at exactly 8:47 her alarm would sound, though she was always awake before it. She would rise, make a cup of black coffee, and toast some wheat bread with peanut butter. The breakfast was always the same simple, without luxury. She never added cream or sugar to the coffee. It was a habit from her time in the field, where those things were considered rare treats. The shower was brief, just 5 minutes, where she kept her dog tags on, never taking them off. Not even when the metal grew cold against her skin. During the day, Emily moved through the medical facility like a shadow, silent and efficient. Her colleagues barely noticed her presence. She was the one who took the late-night shifts, the one who handled the difficult cases no one else wanted. But no one saw the weight of the past that she carried, the memories that followed her every step. They didn't see the scars, the ones that ran deeper than the ones on her skin. They didn't know that she had once been part of a team that had saved hundreds of lives, or that she had lost 6 of her closest friends in the process. They didn't know that every action she took, Every decision she made was haunted by those who never made it out. Emily's colleagues would occasionally ask about her past, but she always deflected. There was no need to share it, not with people who would never understand. No one at Fort Ridgeview knew that she had been part of the 847th, that she had been a part of something bigger than herself, a part of a team that had faced death together, and had saved countless lives in the process. But that wasn't who she was now. Here, she was just Emily Carter, the quiet medic who showed up every day and did her job. And so, she continued. She performed her duties with precision and efficiency, never once seeking recognition or thanks. She touched her dog tags again, the numbers becoming her anchor, a way to keep her grounded in a life that had taken so much from her. Every time her fingers brushed the cold metal, she was reminded of what had been lost and what had been saved. For the next 3 weeks, Emily's life at Fort Ridgeview became a daily cycle of public degradation and isolation, all orchestrated by Colonel Rick Warren. His actions were subtle at first, designed to break her spirit without overtly violating military protocol. The first week, he assigned Emily to menial tasks, like cleaning the latrines during peak medical hours. It was a waste of her valuable skills, an insult to her expertise. She could feel the eyes of her colleagues on her as she scrubbed floors that should have been cleaned by the base janitorial staff. But she didn't say a word. Her hands worked methodically, her eyes focused on the task at hand. Warren's cruelty was calculated, and though the humiliation stung, she swallowed it down, doing the work without complaint. The second week, the attacks escalated. During morning formation, Colonel Warren singled her out in front of the entire base, mocking her in front of senior officers. "I wonder," he said, his voice carrying across the parade ground, "if someone like Carter belongs here at all. How can we trust the judgment of a medic who can't even keep her own uniform clean?" His words were like daggers, aimed not just at her competence, but at her very identity. The other soldiers stood at attention, eyes straight ahead, but Emily could feel their gaze like heat on her skin. Warren's taunts rang in her ears, a symphony of cruelty meant to break her down. But Emily didn't flinch. She stood there, her face a mask, showing no emotion. She had been through far worse than this. It was nothing more than an echo of the past, one she had long learned to ignore. By the third week, Colonel Warren had isolated her from critical medical work altogether. He relegated her to the basement, assigning her the task of filing paperwork, a job that any clerk could do. She sat in a small, windowless office surrounded by stacks of requisition forms, while soldiers with urgent medical needs waited upstairs. Emily was no longer allowed to use her medical expertise. Her hands, once steady in the field, now reduced to shuffling papers in a dimly lit room. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very skills she had honed in the chaos of combat, in the face of gunfire and bloodshed, were now deemed unnecessary. She had saved lives under conditions most could never imagine. And now, she was ignored, reduced to a cog in a bureaucratic machine. But even as the frustration mounted, she said nothing. She didn't argue, didn't fight back. She simply did her job, every day, the same way she had always done it. As the days wore on, the whispers began. Colonel Warren had set the tone, and the rumors spread like wildfire through the base. She was weak. She was emotionally unstable. She couldn't handle the pressure of military life. These lies slithered their way through the ranks, poisoning the minds of the soldiers and tarnishing her reputation. Yet, through it all, Emily remained stoic. She didn't confront Warren, didn't challenge his authority. Instead, she became more invisible. She hid behind the stacks of paper and the sterile, lifeless walls of her office. The isolation was becoming a cage, but she didn't let it break her. She had learned long ago how to endure. Every day, She found herself reaching up to touch the dog tags that hung from her neck, as if the cool metal could anchor her to a reality where she was still worthy, still strong. The number 847 was always there, always present. It had been part of her for so long, a constant reminder of what she had done and what she had lost. Each time her fingers brushed the dog tags, the world outside the basement office seemed to fade away. There was no Colonel Warren, no rumors, no mockery, just her and the weight of those 6 numbers, a burden she had carried silently for years. On the rare occasions when she did interact with her fellow medics, they treated her with a distant politeness, but they didn't truly see her. They didn't see the woman who had stood in the heat of battle, who had saved countless lives under fire. They didn't understand the ghosts that she carried with her, the scars that ran deeper than the ones visible on her skin. They only saw the quiet woman in the corner, the one who never raised her voice, the one who took whatever was given to her without protest. They underestimated her, and for now, that was fine. She was used to being overlooked, but the mental toll of Warren's campaign was taking its toll. Emily had never been one to show weakness, never been one to ask for help, but there were moments when the weight of it all felt unbearable. The quiet days in the basement, the constant barrage of lies, the feeling of being trapped in a life she no longer recognized it, all started to blur together. Yet she never let it show. She held her head high, as always, and carried on. She didn't need anyone to understand her. She just needed to survive. As the weeks passed, Emily realized that the more Warren tried to break her, the more determined she became to hold on to herself. He thought he could break her spirit with his words and his tactics. He thought that by isolating her and undermining her, he could force her to quit. But Emily had been through too much to be broken so easily. She had faced death, loss, and trauma in the most brutal places on earth. A petty officer's games were nothing in comparison. She would survive this. She would survive anything. General Linda Hayes had spent the better part of the past few weeks quietly observing Emily Carter. From the moment she arrived at Fort Ridgeview, there was something about Emily that didn't quite fit with the rest of the soldiers. She moved differently calm, focused, and always several steps ahead. While others hesitated or faltered in emergency drills, Emily's actions were seamless, her medical expertise evident even in the most chaotic situations. Hayes had seen many soldiers come and go, but Emily was different. There was an air about her, something more than just the quiet, reserved demeanor. It was as if Emily was holding something back, something powerful that she had learned to bury deep beneath the surface. Hayes wasn't one to let things go unnoticed. She had seen the signs of a soldier who carried the weight of something far greater than the routine medical work at Fort Ridgeview. Emily's quick thinking in emergency drills, her ability to handle the most difficult cases with ease, the way she never flinched when faced with chaos, there was more to it. Hayes knew the signs. She had seen them before in the eyes of veterans who had been through the horrors of war and returned with scars too deep to talk about. Emily wasn't just another medic. She had a past, a history that wasn't reflected in her personnel file, and that history was about to surface. One evening, after another flawless but tense emergency drill, Hayes decided to take matters into her own hands. She entered Emily's file, a routine task that was part of the usual command review process, but as she sifted through the paperwork, she found inconsistencies. There were gaps, blank spaces where crucial information should have been, missing dates, redacted forms. Hayes wasn't fooled. She accessed the classified database, bypassing the usual security protocols with her clearance, and began searching deeper. She found something that caught her breath. Operation Silent Echo. The file was sparse, but enough details leaked through. The 847th Forward Medical Response Team, a unit that had been stationed in one of the bloodiest regions of Afghanistan. Hayes's fingers hovered over the screen, scanning the records as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. This wasn't just a medic with a few combat tours under her belt. This was someone who had been part of a team that had saved hundreds of lives in the worst conditions imaginable. A team that had been under fire, fighting not just for survival, but for the lives of civilians and soldiers alike. And then, as Hayes dug deeper, she saw the truth: their mission had been cut short. The team had suffered casualties. 6 medics had died. But Emily had made it out, and she had carried their memory with her ever since. The next day, Hayes asked Emily to meet her in a private office. The tension in the air was palpable, and Emily entered the room with the same stoic expression she always wore. Hayes knew this was the moment. She couldn't just let this pass. She had to confront Emily, to ask the question that had been haunting her. As Emily sat down across from her, Hayes spoke, her voice calm but deliberate. "I've seen your file, Sergeant Carter. I've seen the discrepancies, the redactions, and I've seen the truth behind 847. There was a moment of silence as Emily stiffened, her hand instinctively reaching for the dog tags around her neck. Hayes watched as Emily's fingers touched the cold metal, and for a brief moment, the facade cracked. Emily's voice was soft, barely above a whisper, as she began to speak. 847 isn't just a number. She paused, collecting her thoughts as if preparing herself to relive something painful. It's the number of lives we saved, the number of people I helped keep alive in Afghanistan. Her eyes, usually so guarded, softened as she spoke, the weight of the past coming to the surface. But it's also the number of those we couldn't save. The 6 medics from my team who died, each of them, each of their names, is a part of me. 847 isn't just a number. It's a promise, a memorial to them. The room felt smaller as Emily's words hung in the air. Hayes listened intently, her own emotions flickering behind her eyes. She had seen soldiers in the field, had seen the trauma they carried with them. But this was something different. Emily wasn't just a medic. She was a survivor, burdened by the ghosts of the past. Hayes could feel the pain in Emily's voice, the guilt that she had carried alone for so long. It was clear now, the dog tags, the number 847 weren't just a part of her identity. They were a part of her soul, a constant reminder of the sacrifices she had made and the lives she had tried and failed to save. As Emily spoke, her memories of Operation Silent Echo began to flood her mind. The chaos of the battlefield, the screams of the injured, the constant threat of enemy fire. She recalled the moment when she and her team were pinned down in a small makeshift aid station, surrounded by enemy forces. The decision that had to be made: stay with the wounded or evacuate. Emily had stayed. She had performed surgery under fire, stabilized soldiers while mortars exploded around them, and kept fighting long after most would have collapsed from exhaustion. The 6 medics who had died had stayed too, forming a protective ring around the wounded, giving everything to ensure that the injured would survive. When the evacuation helicopters finally arrived, Emily was the only one still breathing, surrounded by 847 living patients and 6 fallen teammates. Hayes could see the depth of the pain in Emily's eyes. She had never spoken about it. No one at Fort Ridgeview had known what she had truly been through. But now, in this quiet room, the truth was coming out. Emily wasn't just a quiet, efficient medic. She was a woman haunted by the memories of war, a woman who had lost so much and yet had kept going. "I didn't want to be called a hero," Emily continued, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't want anyone to know about 847. It's not about recognition or medals. It's about keeping their memories alive. It's about honoring them every day, with every life I save. Hayes sat quietly, absorbing the weight of Emily's words. She had expected a soldier with a heroic tale, but what she had heard was a story of sacrifice, survival, and the cost of war. Hayes finally spoke, her voice soft but resolute. I understand now. Sergeant, I understand more than you think. The bright morning sun cast long shadows across the parade ground at Fort Ridgeview, where rows of soldiers stood at attention, the crispness of their uniforms matching the sharpness of their discipline. The air was heavy with anticipation. Today was a ceremonial parade, one attended by Pentagon officials, the media, and the highest-ranking officers. Emily Carter stood quietly among her peers, her posture straight, her eyes fixed on the horizon. As always. She had been through so much, endured so much, but nothing could prepare her for what was about to unfold. Colonel Rick Warren strode to the front of the formation, his polished boots clicking against the concrete, his uniform impeccably pressed. He had spent the past few weeks systematically breaking Emily down, but today he would make his most aggressive move yet. He stood tall and addressed the gathered crowd, his voice booming across the parade ground. It has come to my attention, he began, that we have a fraud in our midst, a soldier who claims to have served in combat, yet there is no record of such service. Sergeant Emily Carter has falsified her military credentials and her record to avoid proper evaluation. The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate, designed to destroy Emily's reputation with the press and the senior officers watching. Warren continued, his voice filled with contempt. We cannot afford to allow someone like this to represent our military. How can we trust a medic who has no proven record of actual combat experience? He paused, letting the accusations sink in, the silence in the air thickening with tension. The officers around him exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what was happening. But Emily didn't move. She stood there, still, her face impassive. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to tear her down. Warren's attack was unrelenting. It's clear that Sergeant Carter does not belong in a uniform, much less serving in a combat zone. He sneered. His words were loud and designed to humiliate her, to break her once and for all. As he spoke, a wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. Some soldiers glanced at Emily, their eyes filled with doubt, while others were eager to see if Warren's accusations would hold weight. The Pentagon officials at the front of the formation looked on, their faces unreadable, as if they were waiting for the truth to emerge. But the truth was twisted now, distorted by Warren's lies. Emily could feel it. She could feel her reputation slipping away. Just as the crowd began to stir, an unexpected voice cut through the tension. General Linda Hayes stepped forward, her presence commanding attention, her authority unquestionable. She looked directly at Warren, her gaze unwavering. "Colonel," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I've heard enough." Warren's words faltered for a moment, as Hayes continued. "You are correct that Sergeant Carter's record doesn't match what you would expect from the average soldier. But what you failed to understand, Colonel, is that Emily Carter is not average, and the records you've so carefully scrutinized, those are just words on paper." The air shifted as Hayes turned toward the crowd. What Colonel Warren doesn't know, or perhaps what he's deliberately choosing to ignore, she said, her voice rising with the authority of someone who had seen true combat, is that Sergeant Carter served in one of the most dangerous operations in the history of this war. She was part of the 847th Forward Medical Response Team during Operation Silent Echo. Hayes paused, allowing the weight of the words to settle in. The crowd was silent now, listening intently as the truth began to surface. Emily remained still, her face stoic, though the pain in her eyes was evident. As Hayes spoke, General Thomas Morrison, an imposing figure, his body marked with the scars of war, stepped forward from the back of the formation. He had been there. He had seen it all. He had been one of the 847 people saved by Emily and her team during that harrowing mission. He moved to the front of the crowd, his presence almost magnetic. The officers and soldiers parted to make way for him, his reputation preceding him. Morrison was a hero, a man who had survived the worst that war could offer. And now, he was here to speak the truth. "I was number 312, Morrison said, his voice low but strong, the crowd hanging on every word. "I should have died that day, but I didn't. Not because of luck, but because Sergeant Carter and her team made sure I lived." His words were like a revelation, a beacon cutting through the fog of doubt that Warren had tried to create. I was one of the 847 lives saved by the 847th Forward Medical Response Team, the same team that Colonel Warren would have you believe was nothing but a figment of someone's imagination. Morrison's eyes turned to Emily, and for the first time, she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Her gaze met his, and in that moment, she didn't need to say a word. He had spoken for her. Morrison continued, his voice filled with the weight of a lifetime of experience. "I've seen soldiers break under pressure. I've seen men and women buckle when the odds were stacked against them. But Sergeant Carter, she was different. She held us all together. She kept us alive when there was nothing left to hold on to. And you stand here, Colonel, trying to tear down the one person who made sure we all made it home." His voice cracked, but only for a moment, as he reached up to unpin his Purple Heart, the very medal he had earned on the day Emily had saved his life. He held it up for everyone to see. "This medal," he said, "represents the day I almost died. The day the 847th made sure I didn't—" Warren, who had been so sure of his position, faltered now. His face drained of color as the truth began to unravel. The crowd, once uncertain, was now filled with a quiet understanding. The whispers of doubt had been replaced with whispers of admiration. Emily stood silently, her shoulders straight, her heart heavy but steady. She didn't need this validation. She never had. But seeing the truth come to light, seeing the man she had saved stand up for her, filled her with a quiet strength. As Morrison finished speaking, he turned to the crowd and addressed them directly. "Let me tell you what Sergeant Carter's weakness is," he said, his tone measured. "Her weakness is that she counts every life she saved instead of celebrating them. Her weakness is that she refuses recognition while others chase glory. Her weakness is that she carries the weight of those 847 lives every single day." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "But that weakness, that burden, is the strength we should all strive for." Warren's face twisted in anger, but he couldn't respond. His authority had been shattered, his lies exposed for all to see. He had tried to destroy Emily, but in the end, it was his own credibility that had crumbled. Emily's quiet dignity had won the day. Emily turned to General Hayes and General Morrison, her voice soft but firm. "If we're done here, she said, "I have patients waiting." The simplicity of her request, the unassuming way she returned to her work, left the crowd in stunned silence. As Emily walked away, the soldiers in formation stood straighter, their eyes filled with a new respect. One by one, they saluted her not because of her rank, but because of the strength she had shown, a strength they would never forget. The days after the parade seemed to pass in a blur. The base had settled into a strange new rhythm. For Emily, it was business as usual, back to the night shifts, back to helping the soldiers who needed her most. She moved through the medical facility with quiet efficiency, tending to the injured and those battling the invisible scars of war. The faces were familiar, but the weight of each case, each soldier's pain, never seemed to lessen. Emily's work was never easy, but it was never about the work itself. It was about the people, about making sure they had someone to trust, someone to care for them. Even when the world around them seemed uncertain, the recognition that had come after the parade hadn't changed her. It hadn't made her seek out the applause or the praise. Emily had never needed it. Her reward was always in the small, quiet victories: the soldier who took a deep breath without flinching when she cleaned his wounds, the PTSD patient who smiled for the first time in months, the young medic who asked her for advice. These were the moments that mattered. In the stillness of the night, when everyone else was asleep, Emily would sit at her desk and read the letters that came in, each one a quiet thank you from a family whose life had been changed because of her actions. But she never spoke about it. She never mentioned the letters to anyone. They were just another part of the job, another part of the quiet, unnoticed work that she did. Sometimes, she would find herself staring at the letters a little longer, the names of the families of the soldiers she had saved, each one a reminder of what she had lost. She thought of her team, the ones who hadn't made it out. Each day was a small tribute to them. Each patient she saved another step in honoring their memory. She had learned to live with the weight of their sacrifice, but it was never easy. Emily was the last one left from Operation Silent Echo, the last one who could still remember their names. The rest of the world had moved on, but she had never been able to forget. It was in these quiet moments that Emily did something that no one knew about. She quietly, discreetly, set aside part of her salary, enough to fund medical scholarships for the children of the 6 medics who had died with her. She didn't want recognition for this. It wasn't about the money. It was about making sure that their legacy lived on in the next generation of medics, young people who would carry the same selflessness, the same dedication that had defined her fallen teammates. The scholarships were her way of ensuring that their lives had meant something more than just the pain they left behind. She couldn't save them, but she could give something to those they had left behind. The soldiers who came through the medical facility for treatment rarely asked about her past. They didn't know about the medals, the combat experience, or the ghosts that walked beside her. They only knew Emily as the medic who worked tirelessly, who could always be counted on to handle the hardest cases. And that was enough for her. She didn't need them to know about the 847 lives she had saved or the weight of the dog tag she wore around her neck. She didn't need them to understand the burden she carried. She just needed to help them. That was all she had ever needed. As the weeks passed, Emily's routine remained unchanged. She would wake at 8:47, the alarm echoing in the silence of her apartment. Her car still rattled down the same cracked roads, and the walls of her modest apartment remained bare, except for the photo of her team that sat on her nightstand. Nothing had changed, but everything had changed. The world around her had seen the truth, but Emily hadn't let it alter the way she lived. She was still the same quiet woman, still the same medic who kept to herself, who carried the weight of a past that no one else could understand. In the halls of the medical facility, she still walked with the same quiet determination, still touched the dog tags that hung from her neck without thinking. The soldiers she cared for didn't need to know her story. They just needed her to be there, to help them get through another day. And that was what she did. Every day. No matter how exhausted she was, no matter how much she carried with her, she showed up. She was there for them because that was all she knew how to do. Emily wasn't a hero. She didn't want to be, but she was a healer, and that was enough. She had become a part of the fabric of Fort Ridgeview, a quiet but essential part of the base's daily life. Her reputation had grown, but not in the way Colonel Warren had ever intended. It wasn't the kind of recognition that came with fanfare or applause. It was the recognition that came with respect, the quiet respect of the soldiers who knew she had been through something unimaginable, the soldiers who trusted her with their pain and their stories. And in return, Emily had given them everything she could. She had given them the strength to survive, the knowledge that someone cared enough to help them find their way back from the darkness. The letters continued to come, more often now. Emily kept them tucked away in a box beneath her bed, reading each one in private, letting the words of gratitude wash over her. She didn't need to share them. She didn't need anyone to know how much they meant to her. But each letter was a small affirmation that the work she did had meaning, that the lives she had saved weren't just numbers, they were real people with families, with futures, with dreams. And as Emily sat alone in her apartment, reading the letters in the quiet darkness, she allowed herself one simple truth. She wasn't just surviving, she was living, and in doing so, she was honoring the memory of the 6 people who had given everything for others. 847 had given her a life to live, and now she was living it every single day.